Radio TV phono nut here, and we have an RCA Victor model 94 BT1, 1.5 volt and 90 volt battery operated tombstone from about 1938. The cabinet looks to be in nice shape. The plastic dial lens is missing, so we'll have to come up with one of those somewhere. I think they also made an AC operated version of this same radio. Well, in the same cabinet anyway. I've already printed a schematic. It's a basic 4-tube farm radio, 1A7 converter, 1N5 IF, 1H5 second detector, AF amp and AVC, and a 1C5 audio output. It runs off of 1.5 volts and 90 volts like I just mentioned. Looking at the rear end of the radio, it's obvious someone has replaced the battery leads. So they have this one marked as 1.5 volt A, with one lead being shorter than the other. I assume they did that to signify one lead being positive and one being negative. And in these two leads they have tied off are likely the 90 volt supply. And again, one lead shorter than the other, but I really don't like that. I'd rather add colored leads and put some lugs on the end of them to make easy connection to an external power source. Alright, let's go pull the chassis and see what's been done underneath. Here's the underside of the chassis, and as you can tell, it has been worked on. This wiring looks to have been replaced at some point, which I'm not surprised because this era of RCA had the infamous Flake-O-Matic rubber wiring. And, you know, they probably never envisioned that anybody would be working on this stuff decades after it was made. I see some capacitors have been replaced. Here's a disc. Here's a tubular capacitor here. And here's an orange drop. I see that all the off-on switch and volume control has been replaced. But the issue here is this originally had a switch. It was actually two switches to switch the filament and B+ off, but this one here only has one switch in it, so I hope they have that in the filament line. I'd really feel better about there being a switch in the 90 volt line too, but you know, we may just have to work with what we can get here. And this electrolytic cap looks like a replacement, even though it's an older one. I think the original would have been a lot bigger than this. So yeah, we'll need to get it down to the bench, and I want to clean up some of this. It's not ultra horrible, but like this capacitor right here, I don't really like things just sitting up in mid-air like that. I'd like to shorten these leads and get it down a little closer to the plug here. And I want to check out some of these wiring connections. I want to make sure they were actually made properly and not just simply laid on the corresponding terminal and soldered, because that's not the way you do it. I'm sure this orange drop is okay. This disc is probably fine. That red Cornell Doublier, it's probably okay, but I'll pull it and test it. This Sangamo capacitor here, it may be okay, but again, I'm going to pull it loose and test it. These here, I think, are mica capacitors, but we'll test them to make sure. And of course, we'll go over all the resistors and make sure they're within spec. I don't know when this was recapped, but I don't think it was done very recently. This was probably done back in the 70s or 80s maybe, based on the components. Or then again, it could have been recapped last week by some old man using parts from his junk box that had been sitting around for the past 50 years. Yeah, here's some crusty rubber wire that we need to replace, but when we do it, we're going to have to configure the new wire exactly like this is. You see how they have it wrapped around there like that. They have it done that way on purpose to obtain a small value of capacitance there, and we need to duplicate that, or otherwise we might have issues with the front end of the radio not working properly. Here's the speaker that looks to be in decent shape. There's one little minor patch that someone made, probably the person who fixed the radio. Now let's apply our 9-volt battery across the primary of the audio output transformer and see if it clicks. And if it does, that will confirm that the transformer and speaker are both good. Alright. Yep, it clicks. And it also shocked me too, because that inductive kick, something we learned in high school electronics. We used to go around and shock people that way with an inductor. So, yep, the speaker and output transformer are good. Okay, we have our battery cable replaced. I stuck with the original color scheme except for brown, which is the A+. I didn't have that color handy, so I just went with green. The circuit really don't care what color the wires are. All it cares about is the conductor within the insulation. All the wire coloring is to help the user connect things correctly. But we substituted green for brown. Everything else is the same. Green is A+, white is A-, red is B+, yellow is B-. And I stuck a grommet through the chassis hole where the chassis won't compromise the insulation on the wire, and I also added a cable clamp here to hold the wire harness in place. So that ought to be good to go. Now for right now, I'm leaving these ends bare until I decide what kind of plug or connectors I want to put on here. Okay, I went and robbed a plug off of a basket case of a radio that I'm probably not going to get to anytime soon. We have it plugged into the improvised battery eliminator as well as the speaker and antenna connected to the chassis. Let's turn it on and see what happens. I hear static. That's a good sign. And I hear a station. That's an even better sign.
I'm confused. If you through the rooms, right? Yeah. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the pot needs to be cleaned.
Sometimes bigger than so some people often ask.
Okay, we know the radio is doing a pretty good job of passing a signal, so next we need to clean up some of this and replace some of that remaining wiring that needs to go. This electrolytic bypass capacitor, the original one was fair. It wasn't great. The ESR was kind of high on it. So I went ahead and replaced it with a new one. I had to J-hook it because the leads on the new capacitor weren't long enough. Okay, I'm testing this Sangamo capacitor that someone replaced. And as you can see, even on the lowest voltage rating on the tester, it's very leaky. In fact, it's basically shorted, so we need to replace that capacitor. Alright, Sangamo, USA made, that's nice. 0.1 microfarad, 400 volts. And date coded the 29th week of 1961, so. But it's bad now. Alright, that's C1, a 0.1 microfarad, and that's actually the AVC filter cap. So yeah, it being severely leaky would definitely screw up the AVC circuit and cause sensitivity problems. Okay, not getting any positive voltage on the control grid of the output tube, so that capacitor is probably okay. And there's the new AVC filter. Here's the plate bypass capacitor for the audio output tube that was sitting up on stilts. We're going to try to clean that up. I don't know if this is a date code or not, D68, but if it is, that's 1968 on that capacitor. You can kind of look at date codes of the replacement parts and get kind of a general idea as to when something was serviced. I feel like this was probably fixed in the 80s or 90s by some guy who probably had a bunch of old capacitors that he cut out of old TVs and other things, and you know, that's what the guy that taught me a lot of what I know did. He rarely ever bought new capacitors. He'd pick up old TVs and stereos and radios that were cosmetically beyond going, and he would hack all of the old capacitors and resistors or whatever out of them. Now, some of those old capacitors he saved probably needed to be thrown away, but he was not one that was into wholesale recapping. In fact, he passed away, I think, around 2004, and up until the day he died, he made fun of people who did that. He believed in going in and replacing what's bad and being done with it. Alright, doesn't that look a little better than it just sitting on stilts? Okay, new 68K screen dropping resistor. The other one was almost 90K. And new screen bypass capacitor here. They had a 0.01 1 kV disc cap there. There's nothing wrong with that, but for one thing, I might need a 1 kV disc cap for something else. There's no way this radio is ever going to see any voltages like that. And number two, putting this modern capacitor in here rated at 630 volts allowed me to be a little bit more compact here. Alright, I'll replace that grid resistor for the audio output tube. Now we don't have any audio. Alright, 92 volts on that side of the transformer primary, 91 on the other side. That's good. Alright, let's touch our meter probe to the control grid of the output tube. We have a hum in the speaker, so that tells us the audio output stage is working. Alright, let's touch the grid cap of the first audio tube with my finger, and we're getting absolutely nothing. So let's check some voltages on that particular tube and see what we've got. Alright, on the input side of the plate load resistor we have 92 volts, and on the plate of the tube we have 50 volts, so that tells us the tube is conducting. And okay, getting a buzz here at the control grid of the output tube, but when I move back to the plate of the first audio tube, I get my B plus voltage, 50 volts. It looks about right, but I get no buzz, and I should. And if we look down in here, we see what happened. The lead broke off of this capacitor right up at the capacitor body, so we're going to have to replace that cap.
Because what I said...
Alright, there we go. We're back in business again.
Good luck in businesses that, you know, there's...
Alright, now I'm to the point of cleaning the tuning condenser and redoing this rotten wire here. But I want to do a reception check before I do this with the wire. And then once I replace the wire, I want to do another performance check and make sure we haven't degraded anything. And then once we determine that's okay, we're going to do an RF and IF alignment. And then we'll do one last performance check, and things should be better. Alright, that's the station 90 miles away, the talk station.
I understand this question, and I never figured...
And I think that's the country station at 1490 with the volume turned all the way up. Alright, I've cleaned the tuning condenser and we're ready to replace that rotten wiring on the antenna coil and the tuning condenser. And you see the 9 turns of wire they show here on the schematic that comes off of the antenna and wraps around this lead coming off the secondary of the antenna coil. And we'll just unwrap this from the other wire here. And of course we'll use solid core wire to replace this since it's more rigid. And that's what we need in this application. And our turns start about right in this area here with the tuning condenser frame. And with this insulation rotting off, we had wires touching, and that's something we really don't need. Alright, there we go, that's fixed. Now we need to replace these antenna wires that are a little bit crusty. Blue and black. Okay, antenna and ground wires replaced. Now we're ready to do another performance test. Well, I think it sounds a little better, and the tuning seems to be a little better. That's probably because these wires are not shorted, which was effectively connecting the outside antenna, the external antenna, directly into the grid of the converter tube. Okay, 1390 is now coming in near the top of the dial, which I'm really not surprised by that, now that we have things wired correctly. I figure whoever worked on this may have possibly aligned it with that shorted coil of wire there, and if they did, then of course that would have thrown things off.
February 24th. Tonight, news center will have doctors look back over the last year with COVID into the future with emerging vaccines. Had 2 hits and 8 bats, so he's got a batting average right now, already going to the campaign.
10-10, that's coming up kind of high. 9-10's coming in kind of high. Yeah, everything's coming in kind of high. So now we need to align this.
Well, with Luke Hancock, who had some injury problems.
And once we do that, this thing ought to be good to go. Alright, we're getting ready to perform an IF alignment. We have the generator tuned to 455 kilocycles, and it's had time to warm up. And as per the instructions, we're feeding a signal from the generator through a 0.01 microfarad cap to the control grid of the oscillator and mixer tube. Actually, they first tell you to feed the signal to the grid of the IF amplifier tube and tune the second IF transformer, and then move your signal back to the converter tube and then tune the first IF transformer. The only time you really need to do that is if somebody has gotten in here and really tweaked on this thing and got it really out of whack. But since this thing is still capable of passing a signal, we can just feed a 455 kilocycle signal through the converter tube and just tune the second IF for peak and then tune the first one for peak. Now these IF transformers, we have a slug on the top and one on the bottom. That's the reason I have the chassis sitting up on the side here, where I can more easily get to the bottom slug. Okay, that's getting weaker, so we need to go back out. And we have connections that are not very good here. Personally, I want the best kind are the ones with the 2 tremors on the top that you can just easily get to. Okay, that's about where it's supposed to be. Now let me do the bottom one. And I think I'm going to do this off camera. It's easier because I'm going to have to hold the chassis with one hand while I tweak the cores with the slugs with the other hand. Okay, we have the IF peaked out. The bottom slugs were way off, as was this top slug here. And it was a little bit tricky because my metal screwdriver was causing interaction. But the kicker is, when you use a plastic alignment tool, the slugs are too stiff and it's hard to turn them with a plastic tool. Now the next adjustments involve the RF trimmer on the tuning condenser, the oscillator trimmer here on the tuning condenser, and then a the snug on this antenna coil, which is accessed through the bottom, and the snug on the oscillator coil, which is accessed through the rear of the chassis, and this trimmer right here on the tuning capacitor. And they say to adjust this bottom trimmer, tighten it all the way down and then back it off one turn. Okay, the next step is to make sure the dial pointer is horizontal when the chassis is in the standard position, and then we tune our generator and radio to 600 kilocycles and connect the generator through the antenna input of the receiver through a 200 picofarad capacitor. The generator's tuned to 600, and we know the radio alignment is off because if it wasn't, it would be coming in about right there. So we want to set this to 600. Let's turn the output of the generator up. And then we want to adjust the oscillator coil slug back here on the back and this antenna coil slug for maximum. We'll adjust the oscillator coil first for maximum output. Okay, we peaked both the oscillator and antenna coils for 600, and yes, they were both off. And now we adjust the generator and the radio to 1500 and adjust the oscillator and RF trimmers on the tuning condenser for a peak. And then we'll need to go back to 600 and make sure that alignment is still in check, and we'll need to alternate back and forth between the two until we get it as close as possible. Okay, we have the trimmers on the tuning condenser peaked for 1500. Now we'll reset everything back to 600 and see if we need to touch that up. And as you can see, we've dropped down a good bit from 600, so we need to realign this, and then we'll go back to the 1500 end of the dial and realign that check and realign, if necessary, that end. And I'll just keep going back and forth until we get it as close as possible. Alright, 1500 right on the dot and 600 right on the dot. So I think we're ready to disconnect the signal generator, connect the outdoor antenna, and see what kind of results we get.
We set a budget, right?
Okay, I noticed we're okay when we're just picking up off of a piece of wire connected to the antenna input. However,
here in 2021,
we'll tune in some more stations. And that station overloads and distorts anyway.
There to make is McGowan. And first ball hitting, it was West.
Now watch what happens when I connect the outdoor antenna. It just overloads and distorts.
In fact, everything's been 3 up, 3 down. And
of course, we're getting some distant stations, but
They have all that, like, the caps in trouble. They've had their chance. So economics matter.
so we're probably going to have to look at the AVC circuit here, because that's its job. Whenever it's fed with a hot signal, the AVC circuit is supposed to turn the gain down on all of the stages. And then whenever a weaker signal comes in, the AVC circuit is supposed to ramp up the gain, but it appears that when we connect the outdoor antenna, obviously that gives us more of a signal input to the radio, and it doesn't sound like the gain is being cut back, thus causing our overloading and distortion. And that problem was likely covered up by the severe misalignment of this thing. Oh, here's Casino Radio.
106.3 Casino Radio.
station that everybody needs, so you'll know how to gamble your money away. And by the way, that station used to be known as the Possum, Classic Country, but like everything else, they end up doing away with anything remotely good and changing it to some crap such as this. Okay, that's on 1010, and even with the volume all the way down, I can tell the distorted, overloaded signal there.
It'll be on, I'm not sure. Count down the first base, hit by pitch, stand around.
So yeah, we're going to have to look into this some more. And when I disconnect the outdoor antenna, as you can hear, it gets better. Okay, it's about 8 o'clock at night, connected to the outside antenna, and you see what's taking place. We're getting some stronger DX stations and a lot of oscillation going on here. That's probably WWL. Okay, let's look at this AVC circuit. Okay, the AVC voltage is changing when I tune across the dial, so that seems to be working. However, we're getting all this oscillation going on between stations. Okay, do you remember when I said earlier that I was having trouble turning the slugs and the IF transformers with the plastic tool, and I had to use the metal screwdriver, which was causing problems? Well, I tweaked one of the cores on the IF transformer and got our problem to improve tremendously, and I think that's where we're going to leave it. Now, I know some of these RCA IF cans, I don't know if this one had them or not, but some of them had metal shields that went over the top of these. Like I said, I don't know if this was one such one, but you see what happens whenever I touch the slug on this second IF transformer here. You hear noise being introduced, oscillation. So let's see what we got here.
Just tell your smart speaker to play KRJO 99.7, The Legend.
I'm James Spivey. If you have financial troubles, come out of American 2011. Every woman's wish list.
With the news changing by the moment.
Of course, everyone is going to...
Fighting Illini, now fourth. It looks like a hard-nosed drive down the lane. Straight. Oh, that was just more flight companies.
It must be WDIA. And 10-10, the ball game went off, and nobody there to air anything else. We just got a dead carrier.
We call ShareBot. You're locked on News Radio 700 WLW.
Well, New Star alignment is what it's supposed to be. 750. But yeah, despite all the noise and crap, this thing's still doing pretty good. But these types of radios indeed work best with an outdoor antenna, especially if you expect to get any distant stations. And I've also found that some of these radios are fussy when they're connected to an AC power supply, and some will work better on AC power supply number 1 than they will on power supply number 2. So, you know, you have to keep that in mind too. But since we don't have the ability to switch the B+ line off when we turn the radio off because someone replaced the power switch, I really wouldn't advise running this on batteries unless you put a switch in the battery box to a master power switch. And yeah, I mean, I could design some kind of relay driver circuit to operate from the filament supply to open a relay to kill the B+ voltage, but that would just be yet more current being drawn off of the A line to drive a relay coil. And as far as battery operation is concerned, this thing draws enough current as it is to heat up the tubes, so we don't need any extra current here. So what's probably going to happen to this, not today, is we have ample enough room on this side of the chassis, both on top and under. I may end up just building an onboard power supply to run this radio off of the AC line. I know back in the day a lot of servicemen converted these sets to AC by replacing the battery tubes with the appropriate AC tubes, and according to my mentor, you also had to change the audio output transformer to one that's suitable for like a 50L6. And I believe he told me you also have to replace the oscillator coil too. And for something like this, I'm really not interested in going to all that much effort. I mean, besides back then when he was doing it, the oscillator coil that you needed was probably a dime a dozen. Those kind of parts are not so common today, so if I do anything with this, I'm just going to build a battery eliminator for it and probably build it onto the chassis itself and just let it go. Okay, I'm going to touch up this IF alignment again, only this time we're going to go by the instructions and inject a signal into the IF amplifier control grid and set the dial to a quiet spot between 550 and 750, although it's hard to find a quiet spot in today's interference-ridden world. So, alright, let's see if we can do this. Alright, that's getting quieter. That's probably about it right there. Now we'll move back to the first IF. See, that's the problem. You touch it with a metal screwdriver and it throws everything off. Alright, the alignment's back peaked out again, but unfortunately we're overloading again. You get right on frequency and it just overloads. Come on, get off of there. You remove the outdoor antenna and it gets better when the signal strength is reduced.
Bathrobes that are so comfortable, extra long staple cotton, removable waist tie, full length sleeves.
It was just, we want to get you.
Okay, I think I found the problem. This would certainly throw off everything. This control that somebody replaced measured across it, and it measures 9.8K. So we'll just round that up to 10K for the sake of government work. But according to the schematic, the volume control is supposed to be 250,000 ohms. Okay, that's much better. I was only able to find a 100K ohm pot, but that's better than a 10K. But it's only in there temporary until I can find the correct type pot with the off-on switch on it. And what tipped me off to that pot being the incorrect one was this. I'll show you here in a... You know, I thought it was an AVC issue to begin with, and then whenever I measured from one end of this 2.2 meg ohm resistor to ground, I got roughly 10K. And where does one end of that 2.2 meg resistor connect? To none other than this volume control right here. So yeah, that was just messing up the AVC circuit, the audio circuit, the whole thing. So, and our classic country station is coming in louder now. And by the way, I did find a picture of another radio, and this one does not have the shields over the top of the IF transformers.
Ever is the history of the sport, the history of the game, frankly, we'll talk about. Being at home, we've had a lot of time to focus on...
I know. I don't think you're crazy for...
Yeah, we're getting some out-of-town stations, although very faintly.
Closed on Sunday. You my Chick-fil-A. You're my number one. With the lemonade, raise our sons.
There's something else under the noise. Alright, for now I'm ready to go put this back in the cabinet, and this shaft is a little shorter than what the tuning shaft is, but I hope it's long enough for the knob to catch on to. Alright, we're back together, and it works so much better now. Now, it's really not that mandatory that I replace that pot. I would like to put the correct one in there, but if I can't find the correct one, we'll just operate this off of a switched power supply. I think this was just a case of someone using what they had in the junk box, and then whenever it didn't work right, then they mistuned the alignment to compensate for it.
Take your balance of nature capsules.
But yeah, we need to get a correct potentiometer and switch, and then we need to come up with a dial cover here to replace the missing one, and then we'll have us a nice little
35% discount free
battery operated RCA radio from about 1938. Now, if I find the correct part, if and when that happens, you might see another video on this. Otherwise, this will be it.
Long thin practical amount of ornate and over 888 farmers to get a quote. Even on the pitch, so the public was...
Not. Now, obviously, J.J. Watt has some injury history.
We have unaccompanied minors.
But yeah, as far as the pot, that's the one that someone installed. That's why it's dangerous to just assume that somebody actually knew what they were doing and installed the correct part. Well, WHOC is coming in fairly well and playing some Johnny Cash that you're not going to hear on, probably not going to hear on 105.7 The Legend. They've pretty much gotten so where they don't play anything older than the 80s, maybe a few 70s thrown in, but mostly 80s, 90s, and early 21st century. And one thing I could do, and yeah, the Crosley spy plane is approaching again. Hang on. Yeah, I don't like drilling holes in a chassis unless I have to, but what I could do is install a standard 250k ohm potentiometer and just get a big DPST toggle switch and mount it in this existing hole right here, and then I could just reach around and turn the radio on and off. I find that option a lot more attractive than spending $35 to $50 or more on a correct style potentiometer to fix the radio. Alright, back on the little RCA tombstone. As you can tell, I mounted a toggle switch here on the rear of the chassis, and I used an existing chassis hole to mount it. Well, I cheated a little bit. I had to enlarge the hole a slight bit for the switch to fit, but now you can just reach around, flip it on, flip it off, because getting a correct style volume control with the dual section switch on the back is going to be kind of difficult. So sometimes you just have to do it the best way you can. And on that note, I got on eBay and found this Ohmite 250k pot, which is the right resistance. This is one of the good old made in USA pots. I'm getting about tired of the Chinese crap, so I found a USA made one on there. Of course, I'll have to cut the shaft down and file a flat spot on it to where the knob will fit, but I think we can make this work. And that's our WHOC little country station in Philadelphia, Mississippi. The only place I can get it is out here in the shop and connected to the long wire antenna that I have running out the window and tied to a tree. But yeah, I ordered a switch, this pot, and a replacement dial cover. And of course, the post office, keeping with their normal fashion, will screw up if it can be screwed up, they'll mess it up. The pot and the dial cover was in Jackson, Mississippi. Both of them were supposed to have been delivered today. Well, guess what? The pot showed up, but the dial cover is still sitting in Jackson, Mississippi, and that really pisses me off, because if it showed up today like it was supposed to, we could finish this project. It'll probably end up doing like a recent package that I had shipped through the post office that sat in Jackson, Mississippi for 9 days. That's 90 miles away from here. Heck, I could have walked to Jackson and back with it several times in that amount of time. And I'm sure some smart butt will tell me, well, why didn't you just walk to Jackson and get it? Well, because it's not my place to. I paid them for a service. That's what I expect to get. And when something's sent priority mail, it shouldn't get hung up in the sort facility in Jackson, Mississippi for 9 days. You get to Jackson in the morning or afternoon, you get put on the truck that night and come to my area. Alright, the pot's in place.
106.3 Casino Radio. While the coast is known...
With an overall roster and the coaching staff and a quarterback that just doesn't... They drafted well, they signed well, and they had a quarterback making nothing.
they lucked out. Frankly, hurt himself that first full year he was starting. That allowed them to continue. All right, coming up next. Doug Gottlieb Show here on Fox Sports Radio. So
all right, that's working pretty good. I need to go back in and clean the tuning condenser again. I think whenever I was drilling out that hole,
they understand the market.
Some little metal, dust and shavings flew and got in the tuning condenser, and yeah, we need to clean it again. But yeah, it's working good now. Well, I'm here trying to cut this shaft off with a hacksaw blade, and it's getting us nowhere fast. And then once we get it cut off, we got to worry about the flat spot here to where the knob will fit up on. So I think what I need to do is invest in a Dremel tool, and then I could go cut it right off and be done with it. No, what I really miss is the old parts house. It had stuff there that had been there since the parts house opened, and that way, if I needed a pot, I could just take the old one in. He'd go over to his drawer there, and he could make me exactly what I needed in a few minutes, and there wouldn't be, and it wasn't all this crap. You know, if a prisoner was dependent on this to break out of jail, he'd probably decide that jail was the best place for him. I've been hacking on this about 2 hours, and we're about halfway through. And it seems like we're at a standstill, and I'm about ready to be at a standstill on this until I get the proper tool where I can just zip right through this and then get a file and file a flat spot down on here where we can insert the knob on, and then but there's just no need in making things so difficult for myself. Alright, I'm disgusted. My hacksaw blade is getting me nowhere, so I just ordered some files and a Dremel tool, and when those items come in, we will tailor this shaft to fit the knob. And by the way, my dial cover hasn't shown up yet, still sitting in Jackson, Mississippi. So I don't want this hogging my workbench for days or weeks or however long it takes the post office to get their butt in gear. So for now, we're just going to put it back together. I'll put the knob in a little baggie in the back of the radio, and that'll be it for now. Alright, now we're on the outdoor antenna. That's a little better. Of course, we have thunderstorms in the area, so it's not going to be great.
This is 106.3 Casino Radio.
You're into horse race.
Contact thermometer George is set. What it was. Yours. That's why Xander Insurance is the only program I use. The next day, though. So don't hire Miles Palmer or David Sotomayor. I think you just.
So much noise on the AM band. That's what hindering a lot of our reception.
I'm going to play beating Gonzaga in the championship here. I know they haven't looked like Baylor lately. They have a little bit more time under their belt now, and if they work.
But yeah, for a little 4-tube battery radio, this works relatively well. And once we get the dial cover and get the shaft fixed where we can put our volume knob on it, we'll have a nice radio. Okay, we got the dial cover installed and we got the shaft cut off and filed down. It's not the prettiest looking job in the world, but at least we were able to install the knob.
Two out of this thing. Well, we could use a 2-bay. You're driving inside. Into the lane.
Don't take on the IRS alone. They can attack.
To the state of Ohio.
January, 2 weeks after getting his second vaccine.
Starters have not given up. 245, 10th here from Texas.
On women.
Tres, ¿no? Con el Cata, con...
And offer the final loan trophy.
And she's tell you more about that. And also we're talking about food.
That he had on their way to the finals. It wasn't as if
No, equally.
Surprising.
He becomes a very...
Time goes next second pick ball.
There as the ball was hit very hard.
We're really out of fun.
American college. Early lead on the score, though.
There's WSM.
Or Max.
So we're getting a lot of stations on this thing.
It's tonight's game, but coming up next here, it's the second half action. Eric Hasseltine and Elliot Perry will be on the call here on the Memphis Grizzlies Radio Network.
American college has continued to
With the elbow.
Probably WL put up
To the point.
symptoms like frequent gas and stomach pain for years.
Baseman, big hop. Got it. Morgan steps on the back.
10-10.
Getting over.
DIA.
You don't plan an emergency to happen, but have you thought about planning for one?
1200 WOAI.
Because I am...
Compañero José Luis López Amido.
The Righteous Brothers coming from somewhere. We've got some loving spoonful coming in. That's what we need on a local level. I'm afraid the only way we're going to have that is for me to put it on myself. I don't think anybody else is going to do it. Hearing some everlasting love on this other station. I have an idea that's a little school board on radio station out of Baton Rouge. Okay, we'll end it with a little WSM. And that's about all I've got for this tonight. Glad to get it going and more to come.